A solitary man sits in a cold, damp cell in Rome, chained to a ruthless guard, and he holds the secret that reshaped human history. He is not drafting a lofty theology textbook for scholars. He is scrawling an urgent, emotional letter to people he would die for, broken communities, divided believers, and confused souls searching for hope. Those frail, ink-stained papyrus sheets would cross roaring seas and outlast the Roman Empire itself. 13 revolutionary letters in the New Testament belong to the tireless apostle Paul. Penned over 15 chaotic years, they forged the moral spine of our world today. Yet almost everyone reads them completely out of order. Standard Bibles rank them mechanically by word count, from longest to shortest. Flip the script and read them chronologically, and a breathtaking, high-stakes drama explodes into view. You trace the raw, electric journey of a man fighting for a spiritual revolution. You watch him plant fiery, unstoppable communities in antiquity's most decadent cities. You sit beside him in freezing dungeons and feel the sharp sting of betrayal. And ultimately, you stand in a dark Roman prison cell as he whispers his final goodbye. Let us walk through every single letter in the exact order Paul actually wrote them. Our journey erupts around 49 AD with a fierce, burning letter to the Galatians. To understand why this letter flares with such fury, you must look at Paul's bloody past. This was a man who once hunted early believers with terrifying zeal. He stood by approvingly as an angry mob stoned Stephen to death outside Jerusalem's gates. Then, a blinding flash on the road to Damascus completely shattered his soul forever. Now, Paul was risking everything to defend the very faith he once tried to wipe out. Shrewd false teachers had infiltrated Galatia, demanding rigid legalism and old rituals. They claimed that grace was incomplete on its own and forced new conditions on salvation. Paul was so outraged by this compromise that he slashed his usual warm greetings entirely. He thundered that anyone preaching a distorted, fake gospel should be utterly accursed. Galatians drew a permanent line in the sand between human effort and radical grace. From Turkey's dusty highways, the story leaps across the Aegean Sea straight into Europe. Around 51 AD, Paul arrived in Thessalonica, a thriving Greek port city. He preached in the synagogue for 3 short weeks before jealous rivals sparked a violent street riot. Smuggled out under the cover of night, Paul was consumed with worry for his young converts. He dispatched his trusted protege Timothy to sneak back and test their resolve. When Timothy returned with glowing news of their courage, Paul poured his heart into 1 Thessalonians. It radiates as one of the warmest, most intimate letters ever captured on ancient parchment. Yet, the Thessalonians were paralyzed by a terrifying, urgent question about death. They panicked that believers who died before Christ's return would be left behind forever. Paul shattered their fear with a soaring, triumphant vision of resurrection and eternal hope. Soon after, Paul had to fire off 2 Thessalonians to douse a new fire. Some believers had thrown away their tools, sitting idly while expecting the apocalypse tomorrow. Paul firmly warned them that genuine faith drives active responsibility, not passive laziness. Next, Paul confronted his most chaotic, wild spiritual community, Corinth. Corinth was a mega-wealthy, wildly corrupt crossroads notorious across the empire for rampant hedonism. The young church there was tearing itself apart through petty factions, lawsuits, and public scandals. 1 Corinthians plays out like an exhausted pastor racing from room to room, putting out relentless fires. Members were getting drunk at sacred meals and flaunting spiritual gifts like vanity trophies. Yet, right in the heart of this storm, Paul penned the ultimate masterpiece on unconditional love. He reminded them that without love, even the most legendary achievements are just hollow noise. He then delivered an undeniable defense of the resurrection as the absolute bedrock of reality. When Paul wrote 2 Corinthians later, the tone plunged into raw, emotional agony. He had been publicly humiliated in Corinth and savagely discredited by slick rival leaders. Instead of parading impressive credentials, Paul defended his authority by pointing to his scars, shipwrecks, brutal beatings, betrayal, starvation, and the relentless weight of anxiety. He laid bare his agonizing thorn in the flesh, a persistent torture God refused to remove. Through the pain, Paul unlocked the supreme secret. Divine power shines brightest in human weakness. By 57 AD, Paul set his sights on the powerhouse of the ancient world, Rome. He authored Romans to deliver his most complete, airtight theological epic. He meticulously proved that every human being, rich or poor, stands equally in need of grace. Through Christ, every believer receives absolute justification and complete freedom from sin's grip. Chapter 8 reaches a majestic crescendo, declaring that nothing in existence can separate us from God's love. Neither death, nor life, nor present fears, nor cosmic powers can ever sever that bond. Romans went on to ignite history's greatest thinkers, including Augustine, Martin Luther, and John Wesley. Paul finally entered Rome around 60 AD, but not as a triumphant speaker. He arrived in iron chains after barely surviving a terrifying shipwreck off Malta. Guarded around the clock in a rented house, he penned the legendary prison epistles. Ephesians pulls back the veil on a cosmic plan set in motion before the universe was formed. It features the famous description of spiritual armor, inspired by the soldier chained to his wrist. Philippians, written from that same captivity, bursts with breathtaking joy and radical gratitude. Paul urged believers to rejoice always, pointing to Christ's unmatched humility and sacrifice. Colossians fiercely established Christ's absolute supremacy over every earthly philosophy and dark force. Philemon, a tiny 25-verse message, captures a beautiful, real-world story of reconciliation. Paul pleaded for Onesimus, a runaway slave who had become like a son to him in chains. He asked Philemon to take Onesimus back no longer as property, but as an equal, beloved brother. After gaining temporary freedom from his first Roman trial, Paul traversed the Mediterranean once more. He wrote 1 Timothy and Titus to equip two young leaders, navigating harsh, messy assignments. He coached Timothy on restoring structural order and integrity to the chaotic church in Ephesus. He challenged Titus to build unshakable, uncompromising truth among the wild culture of Crete. By 67 AD, the Roman political landscape turned lethally toxic under Emperor Nero. After the Great Fire burned Rome, Christians were hunted, tortured, and used as human torches. Paul was captured again, but this time there was no house arrest. Thrown into the freezing darkness of the Mamertine prison dungeon, he wrote his final letter, 2 Timothy. Abandoned by fair-weather friends and staring at execution, Paul's spirit stood completely unyielding. He charged Timothy to preach the truth boldly, regardless of hostile cultural tides. In a legendary soaring farewell, Paul declared that he had fought the good fight and finished his race. His final written request was deeply human and poignant: bring his warm cloak and his treasured scrolls. According to ancient records, Paul was marched outside Rome's gates and beheaded. 13 fragile papyrus letters survived the fall of the greatest empire on earth. They stand as a roaring reminder that grace meets us in our mess, and suffering never destroys our destiny. Even from the darkest dungeon, a life anchored in unwavering faith leaves an eternal echo. Every single word Paul wrote was forged in the fire of real, brutal human struggle. He never spoke from a comfortable sanctuary, disconnected from real pain. When Galatians roared with righteous passion, it defended pure, unearned grace. It shattered the legalistic cages that tried to trap early believers. When Thessalonians offered gentle comfort, it wiped away the bitter tears of loss. It pointed grieving hearts toward a glorious, unstoppable hope beyond the grave. When Corinthians tackled internal strife, it called broken believers back to radical unity. It proved that spectacular talents mean nothing without the quiet strength of selfless love. When Romans unfolded its grand truth, it built an unshakable fortress for the soul. It reminded every struggling heart that righteousness is a free, glorious gift from above. When those prison epistles leaked out, they proved that truth cannot be locked behind iron bars. They showed that physical chains can never bind the unstoppable spread of divine purpose. In Ephesians, we discover our true identity rooted in an eternal calling. In Philippians, we realize that supernatural joy can bloom in the middle of severe captivity. In Colossians, we gaze at the supreme glory of Christ, holding every atom of creation together. In Philemon, we watch ancient social walls crumble before the power of brotherhood. In 1 Timothy and Titus, we inherit timeless blueprints for courageous leadership. They teach us how to lead with honor, conviction, and truth in relentless environments. And in 2 Timothy, we witness the quiet, incredible triumph of a completely surrendered life. Paul faced his final hours without a single whisper of regret or hesitation. He knew his earthly existence was simply a final offering being poured out in victory. The golden crown awaiting him eclipsed every scar he carried on his body. Today, these 13 ancient letters cut straight through our modern noise. They expose our superficial pursuits and anchor us back to eternal reality. They remind us that we are part of an epic, ongoing story of redemption. You do not need ideal conditions to live a heroic, impactful life. You do not need the world's applause to fulfill your God-given purpose. Like Paul, you can discover unbreakable inner strength inside the hardest circumstances. Grace is still dynamic enough to carry whatever thorn you walk with today. Strength is still perfected in the exact moments you feel utterly depleted and weak. No trial, no loss, and no past mistake can ever disqualify you from grace. The same message that revolutionized the Roman world is alive and active right now. It pierces through geographic borders, cultural divides, and centuries of human history. It offers absolute liberation to those crushed by performance, guilt, and fear. It grants steady peace to those navigating chaotic, uncertain seasons. It speaks profound purpose into the lives of those who feel overlooked or forgotten. Paul's legacy proves that dynamic transformation explodes the second we align with truth. From a feared persecutor to an iconic apostle, his journey is an enduring trophy of grace. He ran his course with relentless focus, refusing to let hardships slow his stride. He guarded the truth through shipwrecks, stonings, betrayals, and dark dungeons. And he passed that blazing torch to young leaders who would carry it forward. Now, that very same torch is placed directly into your hands today. Will you embrace the radical grace that Paul sacrificed everything to protect? Will you choose self-sacrificing love over pride, rivalry, and endless division? Will you hold fast to hope when facing unexpected grief and fierce trials? Will you trust that your current struggle is weaving an eternal story of victory? The narrative written on those ancient papyrus sheets is far from over today. It continues to be written in every soul that dares to step into its truth. Do not view these 13 letters as static history relics. Hear them as urgent, living messages speaking directly into your circumstances today. Let them anchor your heart when life's heaviest storms break loose around you. Let them ignite your spirit to live with fearless, unyielding boldness in every season. Remember that your current suffering does not hold the pen to your final chapter. You can finish your race with unshakable honor, just as Paul did in Rome. No cell is dark enough to smother the light of transforming truth. No prison chain is strong enough to bind the promise of divine love. Paul gave us a timeless masterclass in navigating adversity with dignity, faith, and joy. He proved that a life laid down for truth leaves a legacy that outshines human empires. Hold tight to the message, run your race with endurance, and protect your faith. The same grace that sustained Paul in a freezing dungeon will carry you through today. Stand resolute, walk with bold purpose, and fix your eyes on your ultimate hope. The ink on those ancient scrolls dried long ago, but their power will never fade. This is the victorious, unstoppable story of the 13 letters that changed the world.